What do you do if you're intrigued by some of the perks that electric motoring brings, like being able to charge at home for pennies or drop your kids at the school gates without covering your loved ones in smog, but you're not quite ready to take the full leap into EV ownership? Perhaps it's the dreaded range anxiety holding you back, or the UK's imperfect charging network. Either way, the answer has traditionally been a plug-in hybrid, or PHEV, if you're into snappy acronyms, because you have a bigger battery than you do in a standard hybrid for all-electric commuting, and you have a traditional petrol or diesel engine for longer journeys. Sounds perfect, right? Except for one small hiccup: price. Plug-in hybrids have always been eye-wateringly expensive, especially family SUVs. But MG thinks it's finally cracked the formula with this, the new MG HS plug-in hybrid. The headline stats are an official electric range of 75 miles and a starting price of just £31,495. So is the new MG HS plug-in hybrid a bit of a game changer? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Now, before we begin, a bit of history on the MG HS. It's long been MG's best-selling car, and it's often found in the list of the top 10 best-selling cars in the UK. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. The last MG HS wasn't actually a great car. It had a lumpy ride, it didn't handle very well, and it had a surprisingly small boot for a family SUV. This new version promises to fix those problems while remaining wallet-friendly. It's 26mm longer than before and 14mm wider, which bodes well for interior space. You can still get it with a turbocharged 1.5-litre petrol engine that starts at just under £25,000. For perspective, that's around £4,000 less than an equivalent Kia Sportage and around 10 grand less than an equivalent Volkswagen Tiguan. The car we've got here, though, is the plug-in hybrid, and we think it has the potential to really shake things up in the PHEV class. As I've already mentioned, it starts at £31,500 in entry-level SE trim, and we don't really see why you'd need to go above that. That's because entry-level SE trim comes pretty well equipped as standard. You get 19-inch alloy wheels, keyless entry and start, adaptive cruise control, and automatic wipers. Let's start with interior quality, because that was actually one of the areas where the old MG HS was pretty good. Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't exactly like a BMW or a Mercedes, but it had a nice mix of materials and it was fairly well screwed together for the price. And the good news is that interior quality has only gotten better with this new model. I'm currently in the entry-level SE, and yet I have some nice tactile perforated faux leather trim on the steering wheel, and there's also swathes of soft touch materials both on the dashboard and the top of the doors. I also like that you get contrast stitching on the dashboard and mock stitching up here. Both of those just help to lend this interior a bit more of a luxurious feel. Now, is it better than the quality in, say, a Mazda CX-5? Well, no, not really, because once you start to look a bit lower down in the interior, you start to find some cheaper feeling plastics. But considering the price point, I think this is a really nice place to spend time. Even the driving position is pretty good. The seat places you nice and squarely in front of the steering wheel and pedals, and you can't say that about all MGs, specifically the MG4. I also like that as standard, you get an electrically adjustable driver's seat, but if you want adjustable lumbar support and memory functionality, then you have to step up to range-topping trophy trim. It also feels like you're sat behind the wheel of a proper SUV. You sit quite elevated, and that gives you a good view over the front of the bonnet. My only criticism is that these pillars are rather thick and they're also heavily raked back, and that does impact your visibility at junctions. However, your over-the-shoulder visibility is much better, and this thing is pretty easy to park because you get rear parking sensors and a rear view camera as standard. If you want a 360-degree camera, then you'll need to step up to range-topping trophy trim. One other thing I want to show you in here is the new 12.3-inch infotainment screen. Now, it's housed in a binnacle that connects it to another 12.3-inch screen that acts as your digital dials, and they're pretty effective. The screen itself could be a bit brighter, but it is configurable, and I like that it can show you a full-scale map. SatNav actually is another thing you get as standard on SE trim. I'm less enamoured, however, with the central infotainment system, and that's because the icons are really small and tricky to hit, and the sub-menus are not that intuitive. Now you might go, Neil, I can see that there are physical buttons below the screen, so what are you complaining about? Well, if you actually look closer, those buttons are effectively hotkeys for either turning it on and off the demisters or turning on and off the climate control. You can't actually change things like the temperature using those, so that seems like a bit of a missed opportunity. But you can program one of these two shortcut buttons on the steering wheel to activate the climate control menu. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the HS has grown in length compared to its predecessor, specifically by 45mm between the front and rear wheels, and the upside is that I now have loads of legroom and plenty of space for my feet under the front seats. I also like that the seats are naturally reclined, so I have plenty of headroom, despite the roof being 30mm lower than it was before. You can thank the sporty coupe-esque roofline for that. Ultimately, there's more room in the back here than you'd find in a C5 Aircross, but a Ford Kuga is a bit more spacious in every dimension. As I mentioned earlier, the old HS had a relatively small boot, but MG's rectified that for this model. You now get 507 litres of space, regardless if you go for the regular petrol or the plug-in hybrid. That's 44 litres more than you got in the old car. And while 507 litres isn't revolutionary for the family SUV class, it's pretty decent by plug-in hybrid standards. It's more than you get from a Kia Niro PHEV, more than you get from a BYD Seal-U DMI, and way more than a Mazda MX-30. The boot itself is a nice square shape, and there's no load lip, but it is a bit disappointing that you don't get a height adjustable boot floor, because it would appear that there's plenty of space for one, and the cheaper MG ZS gets one as standard. There's also no handles to drop the rear seats remotely from the boot. You have to come around the side and drop them like this. They also split in a 60-40 configuration rather than a more handy 40-20-40 configuration like you get in a Sportage. But at least when the seats are folded, there's very little step up to the rear seat backs, making it easy to load in longer items. Now, we've driven the entry-level 1.5 litre petrol HS, and it's absolutely fine. It's punchy enough in real-world conditions, and while it doesn't have the low-end grunt that the 1.2 litre petrol in the Citroën C5 Aircross has, if you rev it out, performance is decent enough. 0 to 62 miles an hour takes a claimed 9.6 seconds in the auto and 9.4 seconds in the manual. The only issue is that the engine itself is quite gruff, and the gearboxes are not that smooth. The manual has quite a long throw and a rubbery action, and the automatic is a bit jerky. Issues that are non-existent in this car, the plug-in hybrid. And that's because you get, as standard, a 24.7 kilowatt-hour battery, giving it an official electric range of 75 miles, which is amongst the best of all plug-in hybrids in the family SUV class. For context, a Hyundai Tucson PHEV will do 33 miles, a Ford Kuga PHEV 42 miles, and a Kia Sportage PHEV 43 miles. And while the new Volkswagen Tiguan PHEV will do up to 77 miles, it will cost you over £10,000 more than this car. Now, in reality, you're more likely to get 50 to 60 miles from a charge in the real world, but that's plenty for most people's commutes. And it even means that you can charge down country roads like this one in absolute silence. But even better, when the 1.5 litre engine does kick in, it does so incredibly smoothly, and it delivers punchy performance. This thing produces 295 brake horsepower, giving it a claimed 0 to 62 mile an hour time of just 6.9 seconds. It genuinely feels sprightly in all situations, and even when you're really revving the engine out, it remains pleasingly hushed. Now, ride quality is not quite as plush as a Kia Sportage PHEV, but this thing rides way better than a BYD Seal U DMI. That thing tends to pogo down a road, whereas this is a lot more settled. The only downside is that because this thing has relatively soft suspension, you do get a lot of lean in the bends. Ultimately, a Ford Kuga PHEV is far more fun to drive quickly. But do customers really care about that? I suspect not. This thing grips fairly well, the steering, while being light, is fairly accurate, and you can guide it down a country road at a reasonable lick of speed. Ultimately, what more do you want from a family SUV? So at the beginning of this review, I posed the question, is the new MG HS plug-in hybrid a bit of a game changer? I reckon it is. And that's because up until now, plug-in hybrids with their sky-high list prices have only really made sense as company cars. And to be fair, with its 75-mile electric range and 5% benefit in kind tax bracket, this thing does make for an excellent company car choice. But what makes the MG HS PHEV so special is that it's priced so far below the competition that you could really consider one as a private buyer. And if you go for the PHEV over the entry-level 1.5 petrol, you can rest assured that you're getting a significantly better car. And I think that's reason to celebrate. Thanks for watching this review. If you'd like to see another one, why not click up here? And if you'd like to learn more about the MG HS and read our written review on any new or used cars, why not click over here, where you can go to whatcar.com.